Hello, everyone. Welcome to this EAHAD Meet the Author series. My name is Paul Mclaughlin, and it's my pleasure today to be interviewing Dr. Sébastien Lobet about his recent publication. So if I could get Sébastien to introduce himself for the audience, please.
Yes, hello everybody. I'm Sébastien Lobet. I'm a physiotherapist and researcher at the Cliniques Universitaires Saint-Luc in Brussels, Belgium. So I'm involved in the treatment of hemophilia patients for, I would say, a little bit more than 20 years now. And my topic of interest are, of course, how to manage and how to treat a patient with joint arthropathies and musculoskeletal problem in general. And my recent research was to try to develop, a new score of limitation of activity. And I think that will be the topic of today.
Perfect. So to kick us off, can you give me a brief overview of what the ACTIVLIM-Hemo tool is and what makes it different from the Haemophilia Activities List or the FISH assessment that people will be more familiar with when it comes to function?
Yes, perfect. I will try to summarize being very practical because, you know, this topic is really related to biostatistics and psychometrics. So something that I guess people listening this podcast will not be very, very fun. So I will try to summarize, and I will try moreover to speak with a more, practical language. So, you know, Paul, when we want to assess a patient with hemophilia, if you see the guidelines of the International Classification of Disability and Health, so the ICF model, it's really recommended to assess the patient in terms of body structure with, for example, imaging, MRI, ultrasound, echography, and so on. As a physio, we like to assess the function of a patient with the AGHS, for example, but also, for example, with the gait analysis, with other tools that could assess, for example, strength of patient. And I think that if we want to have a complete picture of the patient, it's also interesting to have a look to limitation of activity. So what is a limitation of activity? For example, if I take the example of a patient with an elbow arthropathy, okay, is limited in range of motion, and he could have some limitation in the activity of, for example, washing his face, of going to the toilet. This is really an activity. We want to check what the correlation, what the link between the limitation of function, for example, a limitation of range of motion, for example, in the elbow, in the knee, in the ankle, and activity of daily life. And with this assessment, we have, for the moment, two scores that are currently used. You mentioned the FISH score, so the Functional Independence score. I will not speak too much about this score because it's a score that is a little bit different because it's performance-based. That means that the physiotherapist will judge the quality of the activity that will do some patient. But to be fully honest with you, it's a very interesting score, but it was developed in India, so in a country with very limited resources. So to my opinion, the FISH score is useful, but it's applicable to, I would say, people with very severe arthropathy, okay? And in our country, you know that we have the chance to have very good treatment. So the joint status of a patient is going in a very good direction. So it's more difficult now to catch very small differences in the joint status of the patient. In this context, I think the Hemophilia Activity List, it's a questionnaire that was developed 20 years ago, is very useful, you know? So the questionnaire will ask some question to the patient, and the patient will answer if it's difficult, not difficult, if it's rarely difficult, and yes. But you have to know that this, as I mentioned, this questionnaire was created 20 years ago when the joint status of the patient was not so good as really now. So the idea of our project was to develop a score with better, better sensitivity. That means more challenging items for patient, but also with better psychometric properties. What is psychometric properties? Is we'll mention two properties. The HAL is, unfortunately, is multidimensional. That means that the HAL for the moment assess the limitation of activity, but also assess participation restriction. It's another box of the ICF model. So with the new score we want to develop, we want to be only focused on limitation of activity. The second thing is that the HAL is non-linear. And for this, it's, do you know, Paul, what is linearity in current practice? Do you know what is linearity?
No, well, I know a little bit from reading your paper, but you probably explain it better than my very small understanding.
I will give you two simple examples. For example, if you ask to a patient, do you have any difficulty in walking long distances? Okay. With the HAL, the patient will respond between 6 levels of response from impossible, score 1, to never a problem, it's score 6. Okay. But if you have a patient that evaluates from always to mostly, that means from 2 to 3, do you think it's the same progress if the patient moved from 5 to 6, so from rarely a problem or never a problem? In fact, you cannot judge the distance between the two scoring of the Likert scale. Another example, if you have 2 different patients and one of your patients say, okay, walking short distances is sometimes difficult, the patient will score 4 points. But your other patient, so patient B, says running is sometimes difficult. It's also scored 4. But should both statements weight the same weight in the final score? Because at the end with the HAL, you just do a summation, of all of the items. But in fact, you do not know the difficulty of the different items, and you do not know very well the distance between the scoring of the Likert scale. I know it's a little bit difficult, but keep in mind that the principal idea of this new score is to have an idea of the difficulty of the different items. And if you respond easy to one difficult items, that means that you have very good performance. It's not the same that if you respond easy to a very simple item. So that's a little bit, the idea behind this new score.
Excellent. And I think you've done a very good job of trying to take a fairly complex description of psychometric properties and the reasoning behind your development of the ACTIVLIM-Hemo tool. So that's your sort of background, and that's sort of where the idea for ACTIVLIM-Hemo came from. So what was the aim of this study that was just published, and what did you find as part of that study?
Yes, in fact, we end up with the new score, and I will try to describe how we end up with this new scale and how we compare it with the actual scale we have. It means the HAL, but also with functional assessment or health assessment, such as the AGHS, the time up and go, the 2-minute walking test, the pain assessment. Because when you know that when you create a new score, you have to validate it. And how to validate it? You validate it with some tools that are pretty similar to yours. It means, in my case, the HAL, but you have also to validate it with different assessments, such as the functionality and so on. So in this study, in fact, it was 2 articles that were published last year and this year. We recruited 130 patients, and we tried to select a database of items that we could ask to the patient. So how did we get, you know, these items? We perform a literature research. We took some items, of course, from the HAL. We had a look to different clinical score that you are using, for example, in other pathologies, such as rheumatology pathologies. We also asked to some experts in hemophilia, such as hematologist, physio, but also patient, to propose us some items. And we asked them to propose us also some very difficult items, some activities that they have a lot of difficulties to perform in daily life. So I will skip all of the process of methodology because at the end it's not very interesting. You can read the paper. But at the end, we end up with a scale of 22 items. And these 22 items, you respond between, you have only 3 choices. You select if the activity is impossible, easy, or difficult to perform, and that's it. Or if you never perform the activity, you put a question mark. Unless you didn't perform the activity because you think that already in advance it's impossible, okay? In this case, you respond impossible. But what we did, so we validated the score on this population of 130 patients, and we compare it with the correlation analysis with the AGHS, with the HAL. And what was very interesting is that the correlation with the HAL was excellent, very excellent. Of course, fortunately, it was the case because at the end, we want to assess the same thing. That means limitation of activity. But what we were able to do is because we choose more challenging items, the sailing effect, you know, of the scale was only 1% in the ACTIVLIM-Hemo compared to 9% in HL. It's very important because it means that when you assess patient with limited, you know, joint pathology or articular damage, most of them will respond 100% of the HAL because it reached the limit of the scale. And in our case, this sailing effect was definitely lower. The reliability of the item was also very good. So we were very pleased to see an ICC, so intra-class correlation of 0.98. But the most important when you want to validate a tool is to look at the correlation with the different tool I explained to you, so AGHS, Time Up and Go, and so on. What was very interesting is that by doing regression, AGHS pain assessment with the BPI, so brief pain assessment, and the 2-minute walking test, the 3 tests together would explain 75% of the variance of ACTIVLIM-Hemo, which is huge.
Yeah.
In comparison to 60% for the HAL. So at the end, we end up with a scale of 22 items with only 3 levels of response. So it's very quick. In 2 minutes in consultation, your patient can answer. And I think you will ask me the question how the scale is available, but the positive point of this scale is that you have a website with an automatic calculation of the score. Because as explained, all of the technology and the statistics behind the score is rather complicated. So please, one thing that you do not have to do is to take the whole score of the ACTIVLIM-Hemo. No, you have to put the score in the website on the calculation sheet, and it will give you automatically the score in a linear way. It means that if you know that you perform a PhD, so you are a doctor in rehabilitation and physiotherapy. So the good thing is that with this score, we are able to perform parametric statistics, which is very important in comparison to HAL, where you cannot theoretically perform parametric statistics. And that's really the positive point of the new scale.
And you sort of mentioned the website. So can people access a copy of the ACTIVLIM-Hemo now? And is it under license? Is it free? Is there a registration? How can people have a
Very
look and
good.
see what the tool looks
Yeah,
like?
very good question. So let me be clear. So this new scale is totally free for the physio, for the clinical practice, for academic studies as well. And there will be, of course, a license because the maintenance of the website and so on is something very costly. So there will be a license for pharmaceutical studies. But for academic studies, and if you want to use it yourself in daily practice, it's completely free. You just have to register on the reapscale.org. And so that the website, if you download the article, everything is mentioned in the article, and you just have to register, and then you can use for free the score. I would like to mention one thing is one of the advantage maybe I didn't mention. I mentioned you have 22 items, and you can try by yourself. Just think about a patient and try to respond the answer the question the patient will have. You will have immediately an automatic calculation of the score, and you will be able to pinpoint which of the items is the more difficult for the patient. But for each items, we know the difficulty. So we know the probability that the patient will answer easy, difficult, or impossible. It means that just try it. If you fill the questionnaire completely randomly, okay, and that's sometimes the case of some patient, unfortunately, you will see immediately on the calculation because there will be no coherence between the response. For example, if you answer to me, it's impossible to walk 100 meters, and you answer to the other question, I have no difficulties in sprinting or climbing, a slope. This is not possible. Mm. So the good thing is that the website will pinpoint the unexpected answer. It means that it could be possible. Some question you can have a difference with what is expected, but at least you can immediately discuss it with your patient because you have immediately the direct calculation.
And I suppose the sort of next steps then. So it sounds like it is better than the HAL in some respects. It's perhaps shorter and quicker than doing the HAL in clinical practice. Is this something you would encourage clinicians to use now in day-to-day practice? Is this tool ready for clinic, or is it still, do you believe it needs further development, or do you want people to use it in clinic and give you sort of feedback or publish their findings? What would be sort of your recommendations for next steps?
Let me be clear. I think the ACTIVLIM-Hemo, so this new score definitely has better psychometric properties of the HAL. It doesn't mean that HAL is useless. So for the moment, because we are a new score, and I think we have to to be patient and to be also recognize the huge work the team from Utrecht done with the HAL. For example, the HAL is translated in many different languages because this has been used for the last 20 years. So my recommendation would be, for example, to use both tools at the moment. For the moment, our tool is translated in only 3 languages: French, Dutch, and English, because it's the 3 languages that were used for the validation of the score. But I can tell you already that in the upcoming month, there will be probably 5-10 new different translations. The process of translation, validation is just not it's not easy and it's costly. It's not just doing a translation with DeepL or Google Translate. You need a validation, you have a forward and backward translation. So it's a long process. So only 3 languages for the moment. Probably next year, if you ask me again, there will be more available on the website. So be patient. And if you are interested to use it in your practice, and unfortunately it's not translated in your language, please send me an email, and then we can decide if it's urgent. We can maybe decide together to make the translation, or I can tell you maybe in a few months this version will be available. But you can have a look on the website, and of course it's free to use. So I would say that the next step for this tool is it's free to use, it's ready to use, but of course, such as each new score, it needs time to be used, and then it's like the more it's used, the more you have publication, and the more we will have new languages translated.
Mm. It's such a great body of work, and such a sort of, I think, an important development in where we are with sort of matching our sort of assessment tools to the developments within haemophilia treatment as well. And actually, I think it's the future is very bright when it comes to sort of looking at
I think
what we think of outcome measures or assessments or function or
yeah, you're right. You know, Paul, we are spending so much money and so much effort to create new drugs. And we have to be fair. The improvement in the last 5 years was just amazing for the patient first, and then for us, because our consultations changed dramatically. I would say in a good way, because the patients are definitely better. But unfortunately, and it is very frustrating for all the pharma companies, it's sometimes difficult to prove the improvement or impairment or the evolution of the patient, just because the tools that are used to assess the patient are not properly designed. And on paper, the idea was really simple to create this new score. It's just a score limitation of activity, but the methodology behind is very up to date, and that's really, I think, the positive point of this new scale.
Excellent. I think that's a very good point to finish the interview on. Thank you so much for your time, Sébastien, and I hope people watching and listening will get a lot from this explainer, I suppose, of the two papers. I would encourage people to go and read the papers, and I would encourage people to contact Sébastien and the team if you have any questions or sort of input or that you want from him. So thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure, Paul.